Okay, welcome to this trailer build. I'm doing this voiceover in a Jeep at a campsite in Wyoming. How fun. This is a trailer 12 foot by 6. We're going to make it 8 by 12 though. And this is drawings provided by the client that we are going to make. And the reason they want me to make it, a lot of people ask why wouldn't they just buy it, is because there's some specifics. And they figured if they made it from scratch, they could tailor it the way they want. It's not going to be a camper that you would live in or camp in. It's really more of a food cart, and that's why they wanted to design it specifically with some very specific parameters. I start by buying this trailer, which is got a 2,500 pound capacity, and I have to be very conscious of that the entire time. And I'm cutting off all these accessories that are unnecessary, obviously making room for widening it. I'm going to widen it as wide as the wheel wells, which would give me another 2 feet. So right now that deck is 6 by 12. We're going to make it 8 by 12. And just starting with 2-inch tubing with a 16 gauge wall. And I'm going to build all my structure out of it. The client has done trailer festival wine trailers and beer trailers in the past. And they said that the team, thank you Lincoln Electric, the team that drives these things abuse them. So he said sometimes they come back and they're like ready to fall off of the original frame. So he said, let's figure out a way to make sure that doesn't happen. So I'm widening this, and you see I make these cantilevers here to fill in those gaps in front and back of the wheel wells. And what I don't show ultimately is that we did gusset them back down to the bottom of that box tube. So it gussets from the outside corner, triangulates down to the big large box frame on the outer edge of the deck. So once you see the frame go on it, all the weight from the frame is right on those cantilevers, so we had to make sure. And then those big box tubes are also welded underneath by the factory. Now here I'm doing the layout from those drawings that you saw. I was using those drawings as my reference. And this is the only way that I personally know how to do this, if anybody has an easier way. But for me, it's always important to see things in real size, especially if that's obtainable. Sometimes it's just not. You have to build it in pieces and put it together later. But here I have the floor space, so why not just lay everything out? And I build the left and right side of the trailer on top of one another. They have different requirements internally, but the outside perimeter is exactly the same. And now here I'm making what's going to go over the wheel wells. I kept the original plastic wheel wells. I figured that would be a good start. I'd build around them and leave them be kind of like the inner fender. And the trailer, of course, is the outer fender, ultimately. And just welding, again, a lot of this is going to be buried in a wall, so I'm not overly concerned with exactly how it looks. But, of course, I want it to look nice and easy. Now, everybody always says to me, why don't I use a bandsaw? But you see this giant pile of metal? As I'm taking the pieces that I need, I'm just cutting out what I need with the angle grinder. And I just use a furred 6-inch disc and the angle grinder and a right angle. And I'm good to go. And now you see I'm doubling up. So you see the left and right sides together there. And you notice the wheel well. I don't cut the wheel well out till very later. Now I need to make curves. I tried to on my Swag off-road. I bought the 2-inch dies, but unfortunately there's too much pressure needed and I don't have the capacity. But I was able to use those 2-inch dies to make this outside belt. So I first tried bending the tube and then I just cut it and segmented it, and then I made this belt, so I didn't need those 2-inch dies anyway. And this outer belt's going to create the structure. So you see that's cut all the way up to the inside wall, and the inside wall now becomes the bendable part, and the outside wall is what I'm welding on, and it gives it that curved structure. There's probably other ways of doing this, but this is how I was able to do it. And I made a CNC circle, which was the exact diameter of what I needed to make all the curves that make up every corner of this trailer. And you see just tack welding. Everything gets tack welded in place until I'm happy. And everything seems choochy and straight. And then we go back in and weld and grind everything. I'm just using the Lincoln MP140 on this, most of it. And it is an incredible machine for its size and electrical needs. Just a simple 110, and this thing kicks major ass. I bought those big giant triangles. They're not fireball squares, but they're more ancient. They're really from the turn of the century. they're amazing. They've come in so handy, especially when you need big giant right angles like this. They're big cast iron right angles. And you'll see how I'm building the doorway in one of the layers, and I'm building windows in the other layer, because that's the different requirements for the different sides of the trailer. And just making sure everything's leveled off the deck. Those bottom rails, where that wheel well is the bottom of the deck. The top has a slant cantilever in it, so it goes from fat to skinny. Now I'm ready to put it together. Inside, I need to be working inside. Now this is the barn that we built in my backyard a few years ago. And we just shot a TV show in here, so everything had to be all clean and nice. So this is one of the first big projects since the TV show. Now Mike the fireman's there. And you notice how we chopped those wheel wells out. I left them together, obviously, until they were ready to go, because I didn't want anything to become misshapen. I didn't want any weld pull or anything to change the shape. So when you do something like that, just leave it long and cut out what you don't need later. Now everything's clamped in place. What I don't show is how I leveled the deck. You could see on the apple boxes on either side. I leveled the deck up nice and level so that everything from that point is level. This tube is level to the ground, level to the deck, level to earth. And ultimately, once I get the envelope structure secured, I take it off of the moorings, those corner piles. And I don't necessarily need, now I'm just, everything after that is just right angle to itself, not necessarily to earth anymore. But it was a big help leveling it and making sure that this and everything I put in was level to earth. And so the whole thing is nice and square. You can see my canoe that I built. That was the first big project I built in this building. It's hanging on the wall in the background. And it was like a 95-degree day, so I should have been wearing my PPE. And that's the front set of windows, which you don't see in this video, get installed. This particular video is just going to be the envelope and all the problems it took to solve just making a simple envelope. This entire trailer is going to be covered with big giant advertising stickers. So it wasn't important to be overly concerned with color at this point, and obviously not texture either. Just assessing my work. Again, all those gussets had gotten welded in underneath there. You could kind of vaguely see a little triangle in front of that front fender there. And then you could see them on the left side. You could see the gussets that go down behind the fender. Now, just for weight, I have to be super conscious of weight. I just cut 2x2s and put 2x2s in there to create the wall paneling structure. And I have all the steel I need that is going to be very strong to create the strength of the frame, welded to the frame. And now each one of these got glued in place with thick sew from Total Boat, and then everything got a couple screws to hold it together. So the thick sew epoxy held it in place while we structured it, and then we were able to put screws inside of everything. You know, one layer begets more strength for the previous layer, and so on and so on. So I'm just keeping that also in mind. And then ultimately, by the end of this build, I might, not by the end of this video, but by the beginning of video 2, I might end up spray foaming the whole inside with like a closed cell just to give it that much more strength. And now here is the curves. These are all the curves I was avoiding right up until now. We have to create a curve at the front top bottom and the back top bottom. And this is a full curve, and the bottom is just a segment of a curve. And so once I get my piece that is my pattern, I make sure it fits all the way along the left and right. It fits at the one curve, fits at the other curve. Now everything in between will be tangent or also in line, which is important. So I did 2 layers of 3/4 plywood, and then everything gets thick sewed into place, and then also followed up with screws. So everything got glued and screwed. But I glue it first, let it dry, and then I put screws in it later. And you see we're trying to run some structure throughout the whole thing. And now this is a very first panel. This is 1/8 inch plywood. And this creates our substructure. And then on top of this, we will glue the aluminum. And boy, did I miscalculate. I bought 10 sheets of everything. It took over 15, maybe 16 sheets of everything to cover everything. Obviously, without patchworking it. I didn't want to patchwork it, so we needed several full sheets where we wasted a considerable amount of it, only because I just wanted to keep a consistent series of lines throughout the trailer. I didn't want to have a million pieces of patchwork. This substructure, I did do that because nobody would see it, but ultimately with the aluminum, I wanted to make sure that we had full lines that would go top to bottom. And then you see me gluing onto we used a little bit of various different construction adhesives. We tried several of them. And you'll notice when you see construction adhesive, a lot of it does not mention metal. And that's a reason, because it does not stick to metal, especially oily metal. But we got a lot of this sticking to the wood in between, and where it was important, I ground the metal. But ultimately, everything's going to be followed up with pop rivets, so I wasn't overly worried. Now, this is that other half curve in the front part by the tongue. I think the previous one was the back. Now here. Gluing everything in. When I bent these big sheets, we got to glue the bottom and wait. So you'll notice I kind of cut back and forth. I glue the bottom of the curve and wait, only because when I start putting pressure on bending it into position, that short little bottom wants to come out. So there, here you see I glue the bottom in place and I wait. So, well, maybe I'm not waiting in this case. But ultimately, here, for instance, I glue that all across there. Anything that's tangent flat, I glue it and then I wait. You'll see us come back to it. And so now, cutting out the wheel well, I had to be careful because that bearing is riding the plastic. I don't want to melt it. So now here was a couple hours later. We cut out the windows with the flush cut bit. It was really convenient. And now we let that glue dry for a couple hours. And now we're going to bend it over. And now that's important because if we try to bend it at first, the bottom would be just struggling the whole time to stay down. If we glue it, hold it for a couple hours, and then pop it over. Now we might add some more structure that you see ultimately by the end of this video in the ceiling, because if you do need to climb on the ceiling, we want to make sure no one's going to fall through it. But we have about 4 steel ribs through the ceiling, and then the wood filler. You can see the girth of the project is a big one. Takes up a lot of space. And like I said, we were patchworking a lot of the subflooring there, only because it didn't matter. And then wherever those joints were inside, I would liquid nails pieces across all of those bridges. So any wood is liquid nailed together, which is pretty good. This is a different type of liquid nail, which is kind of a little bit more for it. I can't remember I'm not endorsing it, but I can't remember the name of it. But this stuff worked pretty good between aluminum. It came in a clear tube, and everything about it was clear. And it was nice. It had pretty good adhesion when you stuck it up there. Was it clear? I can't remember. I don't know. Most of it was a combination of Loctite brand and liquid nails. But again, I'm not being endorsed by those guys, so it's just reality. It's what you need to get the project done and what you could find at the Home Depot. Now, every panel was overlapped, and I've considered this like a shingle. So if the air pressure is coming from the left of the screen going to the right while the trailer is being pulled, every sheet covers the sheet behind it, if that makes sense, just like a shingle on a roof. So every overlap is faced to the back of the direction of the trailer being ultimately moved. Now here's an example of what I was talking about. I wanted all the lines to be straight, so I glue full sheets straight across these windows and then cut out the window. And that's way the line that comes up through the window across the bottom short piece and up the top short piece is absolutely in line, and it just looks better. We had problems with the router, so we just took the base off because it was caking up with aluminum. So, these are the tricks you learn, in the battle zone there. So we were able to move the whole entire bit in and out, like kind of suck it in and out. And so this way, one little spot that's 40 thousandths thick on the cutting head wasn't getting clogged. So we're using the whole girth of that 1-inch cutting head. It's a little dangerous. You got to make sure that you don't go too crazy. So there you see me cutting out a piece of a sheet there that was from the back corner forward, and now the whole full middle of that other sheet. But again, that's the best way to make these lines, and it's also the best way to cut it. If I had to cut those two little pieces, it would have been a big pain in the ass. And here you see Ryan, you see him poking in and out, just using the whole girth of that cutting surface, not allowing it to get clogged up. Also, we oiled the cutting head too. Just a shitty flush cut bit, nothing special. And there you see, you got to be super careful when you're cutting that stuff because those little shards go everywhere. Protective glasses are just part of it. You got to keep your eyes closed too. And here we're just ripping some pieces that go towards the front because we started with full sheets in the back and we needed just a piece of a sheet in the front. And we turn the override on, which gets rid of the brake necessity on that machine. Everything will get glued in place we had a nice piece of wood at the bottom there, grabbing that curve. And again, I didn't let the glue dry. We just went for one full sheet. But here, it was important. And we had the 2-inch steel on each side. So we screwed right into the 2-inch steel with these 2x4s. And then we put wedges to keep the metal. So you see, as we're building the curve up and over, we're securing it. And now we're making the swing open and shut panels that create the doorway and the 2 hatches that servers will be working through. I TIG welded. This is 1-inch aluminum. I didn't need to, 1-inch steel. I didn't need to go with the 2x2 tubes at this point. Still trying to save weight at every turn. And, it's important. We still have to consider some kitchen equipment that will be in there. It's not going to be crazy kitchen equipment. It's just going to be light stuff, really kind of more of a cooler and a sink with some dirty water. And those are the 4 hatches, or the 1 doorway. And just PL glued on that 1/8-inch material, flush cut it. And I had to leave room for the aluminum, which is going to go over every edge. It's another reason why I wasn't overly concerned with the flush cut, because we had 1 inch in every direction to cover ultimately with our aluminum trim. And that is the stainless steel hinge. And I cut 3 of them for the long doors and 2 of them for the short doors, 1 foot long each. And the best way for me was to weld them in place. And so you see that big airspace around it. Half of that airspace on the door is going to be taken up with the aluminum. The other half on the trailer is going to be taken up with the aluminum. And we're going to have a 1/8-inch airspace. Ultimately, internally, I'll build a door jamb that we'll be able to put some weather stripping on. But I didn't want to have the doors have an overlap piece of material. So when you open it like that, you'd have like a sharp edge sticking out, because these will ultimately be open. In this case, I welded the hinges to the door just to help in the assembly. So now when I go inside, I only have to tack weld it to the frame until we could open it up and get it completely out of the way. There we go. So now I could put some proper welds on there. And there's the door. Door is done. I'm kind of making up a lot of this as I go. You'll see we're gluing the sheets on the ceiling now. Again, we made sure that everything overlaps from the front to the back. And we'd glue a sheet and then go and do something else, and glue a sheet and go do something else, because we put all our weights and stuff on it. And you can see that nice big gap around that's going to be prepared to take the aluminum trim. I think at this point we switched to the clear stuff. I can't remember. But again, we had a nice tack as soon as we stuck it on there. And this is the big window. And we tried to maintain that airspace, and that open airspace around. I had to fiddle with it a lot. I had to take some of the aluminum and make it skinny. And yeah, this is very treacherous. That is a full sheet. It's exactly 96 inches by 48. We'll cut the vent hole out later, ultimately, like when I get some of the interior built out. And you see that edge, I'm not overly concerned. That's getting covered later. Now here we're taking some of the aluminum trim. I'm starting to fit out the edge. That's 1 by 1/8-inch aluminum. And I'm just marking and trying and slowly figuring it out. You go to school on the first few, is what I always say, and definitely in this case. You got to creep up on those 45s. You can't just assume you're going to mark it and it's going to be perfect. You got to creep up on them, because you want them all to be nice and tight, nice and choochy. You want them to look good. This is right where everyone's going to be looking, so this is your time to cover your mistakes, but you can't leave a mistake to cover a mistake. You got to really do your best to make it look good. And believe me, I've cut a couple of things a little short, so I had to make a few of them. So I have a few of those pieces sitting around that are just a 1/16 of an inch too short. That's why it's really important to creep up on them. Don't just assume the mark is the mark. And now this is a little bit of a complicated problem and solution. This is where the hinges are, so we need to cut out a big piece of aluminum for where the hinges are going to go. And all aluminum is just like wood. The only difference is it will set the brake off on your saw stop, so you got to override this saw stop brake. You can see here I had already cut one, and now there's the second one. It's going to go right in there, perfectly fit. Me and Ryan is my helper in this video. Ryan is buddy of mine. He's been staying with me for a few months now, and he's become my default helper since we lost Aaron last month. And he's done a good job. He's actually an architecture graduate, and he spent many years studying architecture, so he's got a really good problem solution brain. And a lot of these problems and solutions in the assembly of this, we negotiated together to come to good solutions. So it's good to have a helper that's got some practical knowledge of construction. And Ryan is definitely one of those. And bandsawing them, just showing you, we're just filing some of those with the big rasp. That's the long window. Had a lot of finicky parts in that long window. And here, again, me and Ryan negotiated this build. Pick that sheet up and glue it and pop rivet it along that edge before we wrap it around. Otherwise, we would have no idea how to do it. Everything would be falling all over the place. So we marked our 2x4s on the ground to the exact height. And you see Ryan putting in a pop rivet along that whole edge. We put in a series of pop rivets, just enough to bend it down, tape it in place, put the weights on it, and then we went back and we put more pop rivets in. Ultimately, there's going to be a whole grid of white pop rivets on the white aluminum. We don't really do it by the end of this video just for time. I had to come on my vacation. It's really nice to finally peel all that off. Start to see what it's going to really look like. And you can see we have that air pop rivet gun, something I've had from an old TV show. I had it since 2005. And this is the interior, which we're not worried about just yet in this video. Now I had a couple of pop rivets to hold some of these in place until I decided I really liked the way they looked. So I didn't pop rivet and clean it all up immediately. I wanted to kind of let it settle, put them all in place, keep my 1/8-inch spacers everywhere while everything kind of settled. And I was also, again, just mentally contemplating the finish and saying, okay, I like it. This is just a time lapse of me doing all the pop riveting around, so you could see there's a tremendous amount of busy work in this build. Tremendous. And so much more than I thought. When they said, you want to build a trailer? And I was like, yeah, I'll build it. Now here's my buddies over at Borchet. I hope I'm saying it right. And Tim Housley volunteered to bend these for me. And all the information for these guys will be down in the notes. These guys volunteered to do this for me. We FedExed out some aluminum, and they FedExed it right back. So guys, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I'll put your logo over that area there. And these pieces fit fantastic. I made a bending jig, if you followed me on Instagram. I made a bending jig for the hydraulic press, but it left marks on it. And then when they saw me doing that, they said, hey, we have beautiful machines that can do that for you. So FedExed out to Wisconsin, got it back a few days later. It was perfect. So the curves are on all the corners, and then the straights fill in. And this is, of course, just a time lapse of me and Ryan learning how to do this in real time. And I had to put some screws in some spots to pull it together. I have these screws that look just like pop rivet heads. And we also glued everything. So everything now, all that aluminum is all glued on the edge to the wood. Any of those open gaps are all glued in place. Nice and fit. Really happy with the way this is coming out. This is a super venture into the unknown for me. But so far, so good. And now I'm putting in the lights. You'll notice in the early drawing, in the early part of this video, the drawings had 7 lights up here. And I thought that was too many. So I put 5 lights. And I got these lights at Harbor Freight. They're about $2 a piece. And I drilled right on 3 ribs. So I had to go back inside and with the oscillating cutter, cut out those 3 parts where the lights will intersect ribs, which is fine. They don't go all the way through the ribs. So the ribs will still do some work. And you have these rubber grommets which pop in place, and then the light goes inside that, and it keeps everything nice and tight and sealed. And it looks good. It looks finished, you know, and I like that it's kind of flat against it. And the taillights, I got these taillights. They're not the best, but they're from AutoZone. They're trailer lights for the left and right trailer. Ultimately, I want something a little bit more sexy when I finally deliver this in January. Part 2 will be the interior build out. And I did a quick wiring job. Nothing super fancy. Patrick Reynolds is still going to run some electric in there for me so that when the trailer shows up to a site, they could just put a generator on a plug and it puts power to a bunch of outlets and a couple of lights inside. Maybe they'll run a blender, something like that. And this is me putting in the door stuff. This door latch was like $12 from Amazon. I just Googled trailer latch and I was like, oh, that looks like it'll be perfect. and it works beautifully. Had a hard time getting it in. I thought I'd be able to get it in under that 1-inch hole. So in the beginning of that little segment, you noticed I first drilled a hole and then I couldn't get it in until I cut it out. And the door jamb's filed. The interior, all this stuff in the inside is going to be in another video. But look at that. Kaboom. It opens and closes beautifully. I put small stoppers in there. I welded little 1-inch angle brackets in the corners of each one of these swinging panels just to hold them in place. And this is I had to be more careful because I had to ride that little piece of plastic, which is the edge of that, now also with an 1/8 piece of the side paneling. And it's a little gummy. I got to get in there and clean that. I got to sand that a little bit. It came out a little chunky. But just because my router bit had enough. There was missing pieces to it. But this is essentially where this video is going to end. And I'm very happy with as far as I've gotten. And I couldn't have done it without Ryan's help. And Taylor was there helping as well. And I got it plugged in. I'm electrified to the system. I was able to use the wiring that was in place. I just ran a couple of little crummy wires just to do a test. Ultimately, everything will get soldered and put into place. And there you see it at the shop with the lights down. And this is just one last walkthrough. Ultimately, every seam's going to get 1,000,000 pop rivets. I just thought it was a little redundant to do it for this video. I could do it, when the cameras are down. We put in the pop rivets we needed to get to this part of the build. Ultimately, everything will get a grid on it. A nice, beautiful laid out grid, which is something Ryan's really good at. He's very OCD when it comes to having straight lines. And I'm really happy with the aluminum. Tim, thank you very much. And Beauchart, I hope I'm saying that name right. Metalworks, they did that for me. They make those machines, so look them up. And I like the way this all looks nice and flat. And again, I'm preparing for them to put a decal on it. So I want to make sure that that surface is nice and prepared for their decal. And in part 2, we're going to possibly spray foam the whole interior to give it some structure, get everything wired correctly, put the flooring in, which isn't going to be much. It's only going to be a 1/2 inch thick floor. I'm going to take a lot of the leftover aluminum, lay it down, and then kind of do, rhino cover from underneath. So I'll lay the aluminum down and put wood on top of that to build up the floor. And I consider this a success for me. This was a very big build. This is one of those get outside your comfort zone, see what you could do. And I really feel like I delivered. And I'm very, very proud of this build, only because of the insurmountable amount of problems and solutions. As simple as it looks, there's a tremendous amount of problems and solutions. And so thank you for joining me. And thank you to Lincoln Electric for supporting my channel. And guys, thank you very much.